The airplane cabin was filled with the usual noise of passengers settling down, bags being pushed into overhead lockers, and people adjusting their seats. It was just another flight for most of them, but one quiet figure walked down the aisle, dressed in simple clothes, carrying a small bag. He didn't wear sunglasses, didn't hide his face, and didn't act like a celebrity. It was Keanu Reeves, a man known all over the world, but in that moment, he looked like just another traveler. Some people noticed him quickly. They whispered softly to each other, nudging their companions. Their eyes widened as they realized who had just walked past them. A Hollywood star, the kind that people usually only saw on big screens, was now right there on their flight. But unlike other celebrities who often flew private or chose first class, Keanu walked calmly to a normal seat near the middle of the plane. He placed his bag gently beneath the seat and sat down without drawing any attention to himself. At first, people were curious and impressed. They were used to celebrities traveling with assistants, expensive clothes, or at least a hint of pride. But Keanu didn't have any of that. He wore simple jeans and a jacket. He didn't demand special treatment or try to cut in line. To him, he was just another passenger, and that quiet humility caught the eyes of many. Some passengers even pulled out their phones to take sneaky pictures, smiling to themselves. It felt unreal to be sharing a flight with such a well-known actor. But not everyone on the plane looked at him with respect. Among the passengers sat a man who clearly thought differently. His eyes followed Keanu with a mix of disbelief and arrogance. He leaned over to his seatmate and spoke just loud enough for others to hear. "Is that really Keanu Reeves?" "No way, look at him. He's dressed like a nobody, probably pretending to be humble. If he was really a star, he'd be up in first class, not sitting here with us." His words carried through the rows, catching the ears of those nearby. A few people frowned. They didn't like the way the man spoke, but no one said anything yet. Everyone knew how uncomfortable it could get on a flight if someone caused a scene. The air around them felt a little heavier. People didn't want trouble. Before the plane even left the ground. Keanu, however, didn't react. He had heard the mocking tone but chose silence. His calmness only seemed to encourage the man. The man chuckled to himself, shaking his head as if he had discovered something funny. "Maybe he wants us to believe he's down to earth, sitting here like a regular person. What a joke." His voice carried again. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably. They didn't agree, but they weren't sure how to respond. After all, it was Keanu's choice, and he didn't seem bothered. But the moment left a strange tension in the air. Keanu sat back, adjusting his seatbelt. His face showed no irritation. He didn't raise his voice, didn't fight back, and didn't even glance toward the man. His quietness spoke louder than any argument could. It was almost as if he had chosen to ignore the world's judgment, focusing only on being present. In the moment, that calmness was unusual and powerful. It made some passengers admire him even more. As the last of the passengers boarded and the cabin doors closed, whispers still floated through the air. Some admired Keanu's humility. Others remained unsure. And then there was the one man who seemed determined to drag him down. What the passengers didn't know was that this flight was about to become far more memorable than they had ever expected. The mocking man had started something, but the ending would come from a voice no one could have predicted. In that first hour, as people adjusted their seats and prepared for takeoff, the flight already had its story beginning to form, a story about respect, kindness, and truth. And though the mocking voice was the loudest at that moment, it would soon be silenced by the simplest yet most powerful words spoken not by a famous actor, but by a child with the courage to speak the truth. The plane had now reached cruising altitude, and most passengers had settled into their seats. Some were reading books, some had headphones on, while others were chatting softly. But in the middle rows, the atmosphere was a little different. One man kept glancing toward Keanu Reeves with a smirk on his face. He seemed restless, as if he wanted everyone around him to notice what he was about to do. Keanu sat quietly, his head slightly lowered, not drawing attention. He wasn't the kind of celebrity who looked around to see who was watching him. He just seemed content to be there. But this calm behavior made the mocking man even more annoyed. In his mind, stars were supposed to act like stars. They were supposed to wear expensive clothes, sit in first class and demand respect. Keanu's simple appearance felt like an insult to his idea of fame. The man cleared his throat loudly as though he was about to make a big announcement. Passengers nearby turned their heads, curious. And then, in a voice that carried through, "The rows," he said. "Can you believe this? Keanu Reeves, the big Hollywood hero, sitting in economy like the rest of us? What's the matter? Lost all your money? Or maybe this is just a publicity stunt, trying to look humble." He laughed at his own joke, but his laugh was sharp and mean. A few passengers exchanged uncomfortable looks. Some shook their heads, hoping he would stop. But the man enjoyed the attention too much. He leaned forward in his seat and continued, "Come on, if you're really a star, why aren't you up there in first class? Real celebrities don't hide back here. This is just fake humility." His voice dripped with sarcasm, and a few passengers shifted uneasily in their seats. Keanu didn't respond. He simply looked up with a calm expression, nodded slightly to the flight attendant who walked past and returned to reading something on his phone. His silence seemed to anger the man even more, because it made him look foolish. He wanted Keanu to fight back, to give him more reason to keep going. But Keanu's peace left him with nothing. Still, the man wasn't ready to give up. He leaned back, raised his voice a little louder and said, "Maybe he's just pretending to be one of us. Maybe he thinks we'll clap for him because he's sitting in economy. What a joke. He's not fooling me. A real star wouldn't do this." The words traveled through the cabin, making passengers feel more and more uncomfortable. Some wanted to defend Keanu, but they hesitated. Nobody wanted to start an argument on a flight. The air around them grew heavier. The man's mocking tone seemed to hang in the air. His laughter echoed while others stayed silent. Keanu's gentle patience was admirable, but the silence of the other passengers gave the man more confidence. He mistook their quietness for agreement. So he raised his voice again. "Look at him, sitting there with that old jacket. I bet he couldn't even afford first class. How pathetic." He shook his head as if he had exposed some kind of fraud. Passengers nearby could feel the tension. Some turned away pretending not to hear, but inside many of them were upset. They knew about Keanu's kindness, his generosity, and how he treated people with respect. Yet here was a man trying to strip all of that away with cruel words. Still, Keanu stayed calm. He didn't let anger take over. He didn't need to. His silence was his shield, and though the man mocked louder, Keanu's calmness showed strength. The flight attendants noticed too. One of them glanced at Keanu as if to ask if he was okay. But Keanu gave a small reassuring smile. He wasn't going to let one rude voice ruin the journey. It was as if he had learned long ago that reacting with anger only gave bullies more power. Still, the rest of the cabin wasn't so sure how long this could go on. By now, the passengers were whispering quietly to one another. Some muttered, "Why doesn't someone stop him?" While others said, "I can't believe he's saying that out loud." The mocking man, however, felt proud of himself. He leaned back with his arms crossed, thinking he had just embarrassed a world-famous star. What he didn't know was that his words had stirred something in the cabin. A silent tension was building, and it wouldn't stay silent much longer. The mocking had gone on long enough, everyone could feel it. And though Keanu chose to stay quiet, someone else would soon find the courage to speak. It wouldn't be another adult, it wouldn't be a flight attendant. Instead, the words of truth would come from the most unexpected place, from a child whose innocent heart saw through everything the man was trying to do. That moment was getting closer, and the mocking man had no idea that his loud words were about to be drowned out by a much louder truth, spoken softly but powerfully by a young voice. Keanu Reeves sat in his seat with the same calm expression. His eyes were gentle, his movements quiet. He didn't react to the sharp words thrown at him. Instead, he adjusted his seatbelt, thanked the flight attendant politely when offered a drink, and kept his posture relaxed. It was as if the man's insults never reached him. His silence, however, spoke louder than anything. Passengers nearby watched closely, some shaking their heads at the rude man, but at the same time admiring Keanu's patience. The mocking man, on the other hand, grew restless. He wanted a reaction. He wanted Keanu to snap back so he could laugh even harder. But the lack of response only made him more frustrated. He leaned toward his seatmate again and muttered loudly enough for others to hear. "Look at him, pretending not to care. That's just an act. He's too proud to admit I'm right." His words had no kindness, only a desire to hurt. Keanu gently took the glass of water from the flight attendant. His voice was soft. "Thank you." And he gave a small smile. The attendant nodded back with respect. For her, it wasn't the face of a Hollywood actor she was serving. It was a polite human being. That simple thank you was enough to leave a quiet impression on her. She walked away thinking how rare it was to see someone so famous behave so normally. The man rolled his eyes. "See that? Acting humble for the cameras. I bet someone here is recording. He wants to look like the good guy." He scanned the passengers around, expecting agreement, but instead, most people avoided his eyes. They didn't support him. In fact, their silence came from discomfort. They knew who was truly embarrassing himself. It wasn't Keanu. Meanwhile, Keanu continued to show small gestures of kindness. When an older woman struggled with her blanket, he reached over politely. "Here, let me help," he said gently. His tone was respectful, never arrogant. The woman smiled warmly, thanking him. Around them, a few passengers exchanged quiet nods. They saw his actions and they understood the truth. This was not a man trying to show off. This was simply who he was. The mocking man grew louder. "Oh, what a gentleman. Helping with blankets now. Maybe he wants a medal for being so nice." He laughed again, but his laughter felt forced. It was clear to many that he was only trying to cover his own insecurity. Keanu didn't even glance in his direction. He continued to sit with dignity, letting the moment pass without bitterness. What struck people most was how Keanu's silence had power. Most people, when insulted in public, would react. They would defend themselves, argue, or at least show anger. But Keanu's calmness was unshakable. It was as if he had built an invisible wall around himself, made of patience and humility. That wall couldn't be broken by harsh words. It made others think, why was he so peaceful? What did he know about life that they didn't? The cabin began to whisper softly, but this time the whispers carried respect. A woman whispered to her husband, "I heard he donates millions to hospitals and he doesn't even talk about it." Another man nodded. "Yeah, I read once that he gave away most of his money from a movie to the crew. That's why he doesn't act like other stars." Slowly, the atmosphere shifted. Passengers began to see the contrast more clearly. On one side there was a man with cruel words, and on the other a man whose silence carried grace. The mocking passenger, however, refused to stop. "What's the matter, Reeves? Cat got your tongue? Afraid to admit you don't belong here with us?" he said loudly. His words echoed through the cabin. Some passengers turned to glare at him now. A few even sighed out loud, tired of his endless insults. It was becoming clear that he wasn't exposing Keanu. He was exposing himself. Keanu finally lifted his head and gave the man a small smile. It wasn't a smile of anger or arrogance. It was a soft, tired smile, the kind that said, "I will not fight you. I choose peace." He nodded once politely, and then returned to his calm posture. That tiny response made the mocking man pause for a moment. But then he scoffed again, unwilling to admit defeat. For the passengers, however, the difference was crystal clear. They could feel the dignity in Keanu's behavior, his gentle way of speaking to staff, his willingness to help a stranger, and his calmness under attack. All of it showed true character. The mocking man's loud voice was losing strength, because respect in the cabin was already shifting toward Keanu. It was in this silence, in this strange mix of tension and admiration, that something unexpected was about to happen. The passengers were waiting for someone to finally shut the man down. They didn't expect that voice to come from a child, a small, innocent voice that would soon rise above the noise, a voice that would reveal a truth far deeper than any insult, a voice that would make the entire cabin pause. The moment was drawing near. The mocking man didn't know it. Keanu didn't expect it, and the passengers were unprepared. But soon, a child would stand, and with a few simple words, he would change the atmosphere completely. That truth would shine brighter than the insults, and it would silence the mockery once and for all. The airplane cabin was no longer quiet, even though most passengers tried to focus on their own business. The tension was heavy. The mocking man had turned the flight into his stage, and his cruel laughter had already ruined the calm atmosphere. People exchanged uneasy glances, some whispering softly, but no one stood up to stop him. The cabin crew walked by carefully, pretending not to notice too much because they didn't want to cause a bigger scene in the air, but inside, many passengers wished someone would say something. Keanu Reeves, sitting quietly in his seat, didn't change. His expression was calm, his body relaxed, and his silence remained unbroken. He accepted every insult like it was nothing. Some thought he was ignoring it, others realized he was stronger. Than that, his quietness wasn't weakness, it was control. Still, the longer he stayed silent, the louder the mocking man grew. The man thought he had won because Keanu wasn't fighting back. Passengers nearby grew restless. Some whispered to each other, "Why is he being so mean?" While others shook their heads. "Keanu isn't even doing anything wrong." A woman 2 rows back whispered to her husband, "He's mocking one of the kindest men alive. Does he not know what Keanu has done for people?" The husband nodded, but stayed quiet. Nobody wanted to get into a fight thousands of feet above the ground. The mocking man, feeling bold, leaned back in his seat and laughed again. Look at him, sitting like a statue, can't even defend himself. What kind of star is that? Maybe all the stories about him are fake too. His voice carried easily across the cabin, and this time, several passengers glared directly at him. Some shifted in their seats, annoyed, but still, no one spoke up. Keanu remained the same. He politely thanked the flight attendant again when offered a small snack. His voice was calm and gentle. "Thank you." Just 2 simple words. But those words contrasted so sharply with the man's rudeness that people began to notice the difference even more. They saw how Keanu treated the staff with respect, how he didn't let insults change his manners, and slowly, the passengers' respect for him grew stronger. The mocking man, however, couldn't stop. He looked around at the others and said loudly, "Don't be fooled by that act, he's just pretending to be a good guy. All these actors, they're all the same. Fake. They only care when cameras are around." He scanned the faces around him, expecting laughter or agreement. Instead, most passengers avoided his eyes. Some even frowned openly now. His words weren't funny anymore. They were cruel and unnecessary. Still, the man mistook their silence. He believed they were too scared to disagree, so he pushed further. "I'll tell you this, if he was truly humble, he wouldn't need all of you whispering his name like he's some saint. He's just another man hiding behind fame." His words stung the air like poison, and this time a young mother in the back row hugged her child closer, whispering, "Don't listen to him, sweetheart. That man's heart is empty." The flight attendants exchanged looks, unsure of what to do. They had rules to follow, but it was clear that the rude passenger was disturbing the peace. One attendant walked over, ready to intervene, but before she could, something unexpected began to shift. It wasn't another adult who prepared to speak. It was someone far younger, someone no one expected. But before that voice rose, the cabin sat in deep unease. People wanted to act, but they couldn't. It was almost as if everyone was waiting for the perfect moment, a spark that would break the silence and expose the truth. The mocking man leaned back with a proud grin, thinking he had silenced everyone. He looked at Keanu again, expecting him to finally lose his patience. But Keanu only gave another soft smile and returned to looking out the window. That small smile shook some passengers. How could he stay so calm while being treated this way? Many adults realized they couldn't do the same. They admired him even more, but they still stayed quiet. In their minds, they thought, somebody has to speak up, and they didn't know that somebody was already preparing. Not with anger, but with honesty. The airplane felt divided. On one side, the mocking voice, bitter and cruel. On the other side, the silent strength of a man who refused to fight back. The middle space between them was filled with whispers, heavy hearts, and waiting. The passengers could sense something building, something about to happen. They didn't know it would come from the most unexpected person on board, a child who carried more courage than all the adults combined. The boy had been watching everything, his small eyes focused on the man's insults, his young heart unable to accept the unfairness. He didn't care about fame, money, or first-class seats. To him, right was right, and wrong was wrong, and soon he would stand, his voice soft but powerful, and speak the truth that everyone needed to hear. The mocking man laughed one last time, shaking his head as if he had won, but his victory was about to vanish, because truth has a way of finding its moment. And in that airplane cabin, truth was about to come from the lips of a child, strong enough to silence cruelty and remind everyone what kindness really meant. The airplane cabin was heavy with silence. The mocking man leaned back proudly, convinced he had embarrassed a famous actor in front of everyone. He thought Keanu Reeves had no answer, and that the passengers agreed with his cruel words. But what he didn't realize was that his voice was not the only one people would hear that day. From a few rows ahead, a small figure slowly rose from his seat. It was a boy, no older than 10. His hands gripped the armrest, his eyes wide with courage. The boy turned around, his little voice clear but steady. "Why are you being mean to him?" he asked. The sound carried through the cabin, soft yet strong. Everyone froze. The passengers who had been whispering went silent. The flight attendants stopped moving, and even Keanu looked up in surprise. No one had expected the voice of a child to cut through the tension, but it did. The mocking man laughed. "What's this now, a kid trying to lecture me? Go sit down, boy, this is grown-up talk." His words were sharp, but his laughter sounded weaker than before. Something about the boy's innocence unsettled him. Still, he tried to brush it off, thinking it would end quickly. But the boy didn't sit down. Instead, he stood taller on his seat and spoke louder. "He's a good person, you don't know what he's done for people." The cabin stirred. People leaned forward to hear. The man's smirk faded slightly. "Oh, really? And what? Do you know about him? You're just a kid." But the boy didn't stop. He took a deep breath, his small voice filled with emotion. "I know because my sister was sick and he helped. He gave money to the hospital. He came to visit the children. He gave them hope when they were scared." His words were innocent, but they carried the weight of truth. A hush fell over the airplane. Passengers who had only read rumors about Keanu's kindness now heard it directly from a child who had lived it. The boy's eyes shined with honesty. "My sister is alive today because of what he did. He didn't ask for cameras, he didn't tell anyone. He just wanted to help." The boy's voice cracked slightly, but his courage never broke. His words landed like arrows of truth, piercing through the thick wall of mockery. Keanu looked at the boy with gentle eyes. His heart was touched, but he still stayed quiet, letting the child's words flow. The mocking man shifted uncomfortably in his seat. For the first time, he had no quick comeback. His confidence slipped, because the voice calling him out wasn't angry. It was pure. It was a child speaking. From the heart, something no insult could fight. The passengers began to react. A woman in the back wiped her eyes, whispering, "That's true, I heard about that hospital." Another man nodded. "I read the same thing. But to hear it from this boy, it must be real." Slowly, respect filled the cabin, and all eyes turned to Keanu. Not with curiosity now, but with admiration. The boy had revealed a truth hidden behind his quietness. The mocking man tried one last time, his voice uncertain. "That's just a story. You don't know if it's real." But his words sounded weak. Nobody believed him anymore. The boy stood strong. "It is real because I was there. He held my sister's hand. He told her to be brave, and he smiled. The same smile he has right now." The child pointed toward Keanu, and every passenger turned again. Keanu's soft smile matched the boy's description perfectly. Applause started quietly at first, just a few claps from the back. Then it grew louder, spreading through the cabin until the sound filled the air. Passengers clapped for the child's bravery, for Keanu's kindness, and for the truth that had finally broken through the cruelty. The mocking man shrank into his seat, red-faced and silent. His power was gone, stripped away by the simple words of a child. Keanu gave a small nod to the boy, his eyes warm with gratitude. He didn't need to speak, because the boy had spoken for him. The truth was out, clear and undeniable. The passengers smiled at Keanu now, not because he was a star, but because they saw the kind of man he truly was, and all of it happened because one child had found the courage to stand when no one else would. The cabin returned to peace, but the memory of that moment stayed in everyone's mind. They knew they had witnessed something rare. It wasn't just a celebrity story, it was a lesson. Sometimes, truth comes from the smallest voices, and sometimes kindness is defended not by fame, but by innocence. The sound of clapping echoed through the airplane cabin. What started as a few soft claps grew louder and stronger until almost everyone joined in. The passengers weren't only applauding Keanu Reeves, they were applauding the bravery of the child who had stood up and spoken the truth. The mocking man who had filled the flight with his sharp words was now silent. His face turned red, his confidence gone. He leaned back in his seat, avoiding the stares that burned into him from every side. The boy slowly sat down again, his small hands gripping the armrest. His mother pulled him close, whispering, "I'm proud of you." The child nodded, but his eyes stayed on Keanu. Keanu looked back at him and gave a soft smile, a smile filled with gratitude and warmth. He placed a hand on his heart and gave the boy a respectful nod. It was a silent thank you, but it carried more meaning than words could. The passengers whispered among themselves now, but this time the whispers were filled with admiration. "Did you hear what the boy said? Keanu helped his sister," one woman said softly. "I always heard he was kind, but this proves it," another man added. The story spread quickly through the cabin from row to row until almost everyone on the flight knew about Keanu's hidden acts of kindness. A woman across the aisle leaned toward the child's mother. "Your son is very brave. Not many adults could do what he just did." The mother smiled proudly. "He just said what he felt was right." Her voice carried a calm strength, and the passengers nodded in agreement. It was true. The boy's honesty had broken the heavy silence that no one else dared to challenge. Meanwhile, Keanu stayed quiet. He didn't stand up or make a speech. He didn't try to defend himself with big words. Instead, he let the truth rest in the air. He let the child's voice be the one everyone remembered. That choice made the moment even stronger. People saw clearly now that his humility wasn't an act, it was real. He had no interest in proving himself to strangers. He only cared about living with kindness. The mocking man shifted in his seat, pulling his jacket tighter. He no longer dared to laugh or speak loudly. The attention that he had once craved now felt like a weight pressing down on him. Every glance from the passengers reminded him that he had been wrong. The louder he had mocked, the smaller he seemed now. The boy's simple words had undone all his arrogance in seconds. A flight attendant walked by and placed a hand gently on Keanu's shoulder. "Is everything all right, sir?" she asked softly. Keanu gave her a small nod and a smile. "Everything's fine, thank you." His voice was calm, steady, and grateful. The attendant nodded back, but her eyes carried deep respect. She had seen many passengers on many flights, but none like him. For the rest of the passengers, the mood shifted. The tension that had filled the cabin earlier was replaced with quiet admiration. Some people looked at Keanu with new eyes, no longer seeing only a famous actor, but a man who lived simply and humbly. The child's truth had reminded them that greatness wasn't about wealth or status. It was about the heart. The boy's words continued to echo in the passengers' minds. "My sister is alive today because of what he did." And that single sentence carried more weight than all the insults the mocking man had spoken. It revealed the hidden side of Keanu's life, the side he never showed to cameras, the side where he gave without asking for recognition. The passengers realized they were not just sharing a flight with a celebrity, they were sitting beside someone who had quietly changed lives. One man leaned toward his wife and said, "You know, this is the kind of story people don't believe unless they see it, but now we've seen it." His wife nodded, her eyes soft. "Yes, and it came from the mouth of a child. That's why it feels so real." The truth spoken by innocence carried more power than any argument ever could. The mocking man finally shifted again, as if he wanted to disappear into his seat. He avoided looking at anyone, his earlier arrogance completely gone. The passengers no longer paid him attention. He had lost the stage. His voice had been replaced by a child's honesty and a cabin full of respect. Keanu leaned back in his seat, his gaze calm. For a moment, he closed his eyes, as if letting the peace return. He wasn't smiling for fame. He wasn't sitting there to prove anything. He was simply himself, a man who chose humility over pride and silence over anger. Around him, people looked at him with admiration, but he didn't seek their eyes. That was the difference. The boy turned to his mother and whispered, "Did I do something wrong?" His mother kissed his forehead gently. "No, you did something very right." Her words comforted him, but the truth was bigger than he could understand at his age. He had stood up when no one else dared, and in doing so, he had reminded everyone. On that plane of the power of honesty and kindness, the flight continued smoothly, but the passengers carried a new energy with them. They knew they would leave the plane with a story to tell, not about a celebrity scandal, not about a rude man on a flight, but about a child who spoke the truth and a man whose humility proved stronger than insults. The airplane cabin was alive with the sound of clapping. It was not the kind of polite applause people gave after a movie. It was deep, heartfelt, and full of respect. One by one, passengers joined in, until the whole cabin was filled with the steady rhythm of hands coming together. The boy's bravery had touched them all, and Keanu's calm dignity had won their hearts. The mocking man who had spent the first half of the flight speaking loudly now sank lower into his seat, his shoulders hunched, and his eyes avoided everyone. Around him, he had wanted attention, but now the attention was heavy and full of judgment. The faces that once looked at Keanu with curiosity now turned to him with disapproval. He had been the loudest voice, but now he was silent, completely silenced by the truth spoken by a child. Keanu looked around slowly, his eyes soft and humble. He gave a small nod toward the passengers clapping, but he didn't raise his hands to stop them. He didn't try to claim the moment for himself. Instead, he lowered his gaze slightly, almost embarrassed by the praise. His humility only made the passengers admire him more. They saw clearly now why the boy had defended him. This wasn't a man pretending to be kind. This was a man who truly lived with kindness in his heart. The boy sat back down, but passengers leaned toward him, patting his shoulder, smiling warmly. One woman said, "You were so brave, sweetheart. You reminded us all what really matters." The boy blushed, hiding his face against his mother's arm. His mother smiled proudly, tears glistening in her eyes. She knew her son's words had changed the whole atmosphere of the flight. Meanwhile, Keanu finally leaned slightly forward, catching the boy's eye. He placed his hand gently over his heart again and mouthed the words, "Thank you." The boy nodded back, his small face glowing with pride. For a moment it seemed like the distance between a Hollywood star and an ordinary child disappeared. They were simply two people who understood each other, one with a life of fame and struggle and the other with innocence and courage. Passengers continued whispering, but their whispers carried admiration now. "I can't believe how humble he is," one man said. "I've never seen someone so famous act so normal," another replied. A woman added softly, "It's true what they say. The ones who are truly great don't need to show off." Their words traveled across the rows, building a new image of Keanu in their minds, not as a movie star but as a man of character. The mocking man fidgeted in his seat. His earlier laughter and arrogance had disappeared. Now he looked small, almost invisible. He tried to focus on the window, pretending to be interested in the clouds, but it was too late. The entire cabin had turned against him. He realized something important too late, that cruelty can make noise, but kindness always lasts longer. His silence was not chosen, it was forced by the weight of truth. Keanu, however, never looked at him with anger. He never tried to humiliate him in return. That was not his way. Instead, he let the man fade quietly, choosing to give his attention to the boy who had defended him. That choice again showed the kind of person Keanu truly was, strong enough to ignore hate and humble enough to honor innocence. As the clapping slowed, passengers returned to their seats, but the energy in the cabin had shifted. There was a warmth, a quiet connection between strangers who had just witnessed the same powerful moment. They shared smiles, nods, and small words. It felt like everyone was part of something bigger than just a flight. They had seen kindness defended and cruelty defeated. One elderly man leaned across the aisle and said softly to the boy, "Young man, You reminded us that truth has no age. Thank you." The boy's eyes widened, and he smiled shyly. His mother hugged him tighter, whispering again how proud she was. For Keanu, the moment was personal. He never expected anyone to defend him, especially not a child. But seeing that young courage reminded him why he always tried to live humbly. It wasn't about reputation. It wasn't about fame. It was about setting an example, living with kindness even when others tried to pull him down. And now, on this flight, a child had shown the same courage. The rest of the passengers settled in, but their eyes returned to Keanu from time to time. Some smiled, some nodded, and a few even whispered thanks as the flight continued. He responded with the same small, polite gestures, a smile, a nod, a quiet thank you. He didn't act like a hero, but to the passengers that was exactly what he had become. The mocking man stayed silent for the remainder of the journey. His arrogance had been broken, and he couldn't bring himself to speak again. Every time he shifted in his seat, he could feel the stares of others reminding him of his failure. He had tried to bring a man down with words, but in the end, it was his own pride that had been destroyed. The airplane, once filled with unease, now carried peace. And in the middle of that peace sat Keanu Reeves, a man whose quiet strength had spoken louder than any insult, and beside him, a child whose voice had carried the truth that no one else dared to speak. Together, they had changed the atmosphere of the flight, leaving every passenger with a memory they would never forget.